this combination of automated malware and human-directed adversary.
They can make up URLs they send to you and end up directing you to fake places.
The most common password that's used today is still password. After 20 years of telling people not to do it, it's still the most common password.
Hi, Dave Littman, Truth in IT. Welcome to today's webcast. Today we're talking about the top 5 cloud security hacks and how you can avoid them. Today's webcast is sponsored by KnowBe4, and in just a second I'm going to be handing things over to Roger Grimes. You know Roger, and even if you don't, Roger is Dean Emeritus of our Grimes Education, and Roger's going to be taking us through a presentation we expect today to go probably about 50-55 minutes, and of course we'll be taking your questions and comments in the chat room. We have staff standing by from Truth in IT to answer any questions you may have about the video or the audio or anything like that, and so please keep your questions coming. As you may or may not know, we are also doing an Amazon gift card giveaway, and here's how that works. Toward the end of the event, we'll display an image directly over the video feed that looks like this. When you see it, just click on it and it will take you to a page that looks like this. Just hit the enter button. You'll find out immediately whether or not you've won, and whether you have or you haven't, come back. We're running these events all the time. So any questions on that, please just chat those in as well. And without further ado, welcome back, Roger. So great to have you back with us.
Always glad to be here.
Oh, fabulous, fabulous. Well, Roger, like we typically do, I'm gonna let you run with it. This is obviously, this issue is top of mind for everyone, and I don't want to get in the way. You always have all the information lined up that everyone wants, so I'll let you take it, and we'll go from there.
Okay, thanks a lot, Dave, and thanks everybody for showing up. I'm going to talk about the top 5 cloud security hacks and how you can avoid them. And I really do think I have a really good understanding about what they are and what you should be concentrating on. If you haven't met me before, I'm Roger Grimes. I've been doing computer security for over 35 years, earned all of these gray hairs. I've written 14 books and over 1,300 magazine articles on computer security, and a lot of them involve cloud security. Of course, today, most of us are working on some cloud product or two. There's all my books. My latest one is Fighting Phishing, Everything You Can Do to Fight Social Engineering and Phishing, and that's going to become important and self-evident in today's talk about that we need to fight phishing, because that's the #1 problem out there. But there's other problems too, and we'll be discussing them. I work for KnowBe4, been with KnowBe4 for 6 years. I love working for them. We're the world's largest security awareness training and simulated phishing platform vendor, which means we try to help people not to get phished and socially engineered. Again, that's very important because it is the #1 way that most people and networks are compromised. Today's presentation, I'm going to talk about the Cloud Security Alliance's top 11 threats. Then I'm going to talk about how I disagree with that report a little bit, and then the top 5 threats that you absolutely need to be laser focused on if you want to stop your cloud products or services, whether you're subscribing to them or running them yourselves, from being taken over. We'll start off with the Cloud Security Alliance's top 11 threats. Cloud Security Alliance is the #1 cloud security organization, been around since 2008. I've belonged to it for a long, long time. I'm in an active working group, although I'm on their quantum safe security working group for many years, very active in that. But if you want to know about cloud security and cloud certifications and stuff like that, Cloud Security Alliance is the place to go. Every year they put out what I think was probably a top 10 report years ago, but now it's become a top 11. I think it's been a top 12 at times. And their security reports kind of have cute little names every year. This year it's the Pandemic 11 Deep Dive Report. And again, they've had the Egregious 11 and Nefarious 12 or something like that. But this year it's called the Pandemic 11 Deep Dive Report. It's considered the best report on cloud security and what you should focus on. And I think everybody, if you're concerned about cloud security, you should go read that report. It has the best advice in it that you can imagine on how to protect yourself in cloud environments. Here's the top 11 threats that they said you should be worried about, and they are. I agree that these are things that you absolutely should be worried about. I'm just going to talk about the 5 of these that I think are more important than the other 6, but they're all very important. And you should go get that report and read it. It's from a survey of over 700 industry experts on what they think are the top security issues. And again, but it's not really in order of importance. I'm going to give you the top 5 in my order of importance. I love the report, but it's a survey of people's gut feelings, not actual data. And my title is I'm the data-driven defense evangelist. I'm all about actual data driving it. And there's a lot of people that fear things that aren't quite as things that you should be worried about as others. So, gut feelings are great, but I like gut feelings backed by data even better. It doesn't include some types of attacks, like it doesn't include distributed denial of service attacks, which are still a big deal today, where different services get taken down. It seems a bit vendor driven at times. Again, there's no risk relevance of how, which of the 11 is the one you should worry about the most. And I'm going to talk about that. And it's also a hodgepodge, a mix of threats and causes of threats. And by that, I mean, maybe they say, well, be worried about ransomware or something like that. Well, ransomware is the outcome of some particular type of attack, like social engineering, unpatched software, something like that. Lots of surveys get causation mixed up with the outcome of those events, and this report does too. It's not unnatural. It's not uncommon in the computer cybersecurity world that they mix up threats and causes of threats. So, but anyways, we'll talk more about that. And as another example I give here, they tell you to worry about data exfiltration. In their top 11, data exfiltration is the outcome of some other threat. Again, social engineering, unpatched software, stolen credentials, eavesdropping, something like that. And it's not really, exfiltration is not a threat. It's an outcome of a threat. But it's still a great report. Anything by the CSA is great and should be read by anybody that's interested in it. But the way that I like people to think about is, it's really good to have real data and to also to drive risk relevance about what events and what threats and risk you should be worried about the most, because it's really tough to fix 11 things all at once. It's really, the average organization and person can't fix more than 2 or 3 things well at once. So if they tell you, go fix these 11 things, it's really tough to do that. So I'm going to talk about at least the top 5 that you should be worried about, and tell you about the 2 or 3 that really are the worst. And we're going to focus on root causes of initial exploits and not the outcome of exploits. Again, data exfiltration is the outcome of an initial exploit. And if you don't stop the initial exploit, they're going to be able to do anything they want to do. And you should want to mitigate the top root causes first and best. That's what this talk is all about. And you need to communicate the top risk, the top root causes that could be successful against you and your cloud products, and plan your defenses across your teams in the organization. I call this a data-driven defense, using data to rank the different threats and risk against your organization and networks and cloud products. If you're interested in it, I wrote a book on it called Data-Driven Computer Defense that sold like over 50,000 copies, but I write lots of free stuff. I write about this all the time, lots of free stuff. Certainly, I've talked about it on this channel and thread before. Dave and I have talked about it many times, but if you're interested, you can go look up look up Data-Driven Defense by Roger Grimes, and you'll get lots of free information on it. And that should drive the way that we think about cloud security as well. And again, number one concept to that is to worry about root causes. Like, again, some people worry about data exfiltration or ransomware or something like that. And it's all right to be worried about that, because we don't want bad outcomes. But it's really how those outcomes happen. What are the root causes of how the hackers or malware got into your environment to do those bad things? That's really what you need to be focused about, because worrying about data exfiltration or ransomware is like worrying about your car's brakes after the car has been stolen. You can worry about that, but it's not what you should primarily focus on. You should focus on root causes. Here's the 12 or 13 root causes that are involved in every single hacker and malware attack since I've been in computer security. These are I made up a list of, I think, 10 or 13. They kind of changed names and orders and things like that. But it's really what's important is over 35 years, these have been the same root causes for all hacking and malware. I can't think of a hacking or a malware case that didn't happen because of one of these root causes. And so we need to concentrate on stopping these root causes, and also, really importantly, figuring out what are the ones that are the top root causes that you need to focus on first and best. A data-driven defender's approach to cloud security, really all cybersecurity, is that you should say, this is the thing that's most likely to impact me the most, and so I need to put a lot of resources against that. And here's the number 2 root cause, and here's the number 3 root cause, and so on, so that you can focus on preventing people from getting into your computers and networks and cloud products. So you want to focus on the most impactful, most likely root cause threat. And then follow that one from number 1 to number 2 to number 3 to start putting down those threats. And in most organizations and cloud products, it's only a handful of things that are usually most the risk. In most organizations, it's just 1 or 2 or 3 things that accounts for 99% of the risk in most organizations. And if you don't know this, I'm going to share it right now. It's social engineering and unpatched software, number 1, and number 2, root cause threats. Social engineering is involved in about 70 to 90% of successful data breaches. Unpatched software is involved in about 33% of successful breaches. These have been the top 2 root causes with very little interruption since the beginning of network computers. So this is not new. And social engineering and unpatched software accounts for anywhere from 90 to 99% of the risk in most organizations, and certainly in cloud products as well. There's a third threat here that changes over time. These days, it's stolen or guest credentials, and we'll talk about all 3 of these today, plus add some other ones that you need to worry about specifically in cloud environments. But if you don't, one of the best things I can tell you to do is to better focus on defeating social engineering and making sure your software and firmware is patched. Those 2 things, really how well you do those 2 things, are probably how likely your organization or cloud product is or isn't going to fall to successful exploitation. And then everything you can do through policies and technical defenses and training and education you can do to stop bad people from using social engineering and unpatched software. Anything you can do to prevent those things from being abused is what you should focus on in a data-driven defense. So let's go talk about the top cloud threats today. And I will say what's interesting is, clouds came out probably about 2 decades ago, and there's been different names for them, but they've been around for about 2 decades. And over those 2 decades, cloud security experts, including myself, we were really worried about cloud-specific attacks. So clouds are subject to every attack that's possible in a traditional on-premises environment, plus all these cloud-specific threats. And we were really worried about attacks against them, like tenant commingling. So most cloud products have multiple customers or tenants, and we were worried about one tenant being able to see another tenant's data. And let me say that kind of has happened a little bit. Even, there'd be things like one tenant leaves a cloud and another tenant comes in, but the new tenant can see the old tenant's data or something like that, or they can use having access to a cloud to see other tenant stuff. That was certainly something we were worried about, and we saw a little bit of it. We've been worried about cloud-based malware, like a computer virus that will go across the cloud and infect every tenant at one time. So far, that hasn't happened at all that I know of, although it's something certainly I worry about in the future. Most cloud products work on virtual machine technology, VMware or otherwise, and so we were worried about host to client and client to host and client to client attacks in the virtual environment. And that's happened a little bit, but really hasn't been significant. It does happen, but hasn't been a huge cause. We were worried about malicious undeletion, again, where a tenant or an unauthorized party can go undelete a tenant's data and then see that data. We're worried about it. We've seen some research projects about that. Really hasn't come to pass in a big way. And then data ownership issues. This is certainly one that you should be concerned about legally. Is who owns your data in the cloud? Like just as a person, just as an individual person, I have a lot of my pictures and videos and things, in LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram and all that stuff. And I have people write me all the time that say that a hacker took away their login account and they've lost access to all their content, all their pictures, and that LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram and Twitter are doing nothing to help them get their access back. And most people I know have never recovered their access. So, and they're very distraught. They're like, all my pictures, all the pictures of my dead dad, is in Facebook and it's gone and there's nothing I can do. It isn't. Just realize that, cloud, people will joke and say cloud computing stands for other people's computers. And there's a lot of truth to that. And, you don't own anything that's in those clouds in a lot of cases. Or from a business perspective, enterprise perspective, when you upload your data to a cloud, and maybe you decide you want to go use another cloud product, can you get your existing data out of that cloud to the new cloud product, right? The old cloud vendor has no incentive to help you easily move your data to the new cloud. And if that vendor goes away, that cloud vendor that you're using files bankruptcy or something, can you get your data out? Or sometimes we've had cases of vendors reselling the data to other people or to other companies without the implied authorized consent of the tenant. And so data ownership issues are real things to be concerned about. But again, just like all of these issues here, there are potentially real attacks, there are real risks, there are real threats, but they haven't become nearly as explosive as we thought they were going to be. They just haven't become that big of a deal. And the things that really have hit clouds have been the same things that for decades have been problems in on-premises environments. And that's important to remember, is that the cloud-specific threats we were worried about, the real threats, the real risks, but they haven't become the primary movers of how people have been compromised in the cloud. The real issues that are causing the problems aren't as sexy as these cloud-specific products, although maybe one day, again, we'll see a cloud-based malware or computer worm or Trojan that infects all the tenants of a cloud product all at once. And I'll have to take this off my list of things that haven't caused a real problem. What are the top 5 cloud security threats? It's social engineering. As I talked about, again, is involved in 70 to 90% of all malicious compromises. Logon authentication issues, we'll talk about that. Overly permissive permissions, certainly a big problem. Unpatched software and firmware, big deal. And insecure APIs, so the overly permissive permissions and insecure APIs have been a problem in on-premises environments that tend to be a bigger problem in the cloud environment. And we'll talk about why that is and how you should fix it. But just starting out with social engineering, again, social engineering, it's responsible or involved in most of the attacks against most people, whether it's on-premises or cloud attacks. Here's an example of an attack in 2022, and this is in the Cloud Security Alliance's report, which is why I have that here. If you see these pretty little charts, they're taken out of the Cloud Security Alliance report. But in 2022, Dropbox, one of the world's largest file repository things, was successfully targeted with phishing. So there was a phishing via email and a website. And this ended up, some employees clicked on malicious links and they authenticated to a fake website that looked like the regular website, gave up their GitHub credentials, and they even bypassed multi-factor authentication one-time password credentials, which is, we're going to talk more about that as well. And it enabled the attacker to access Dropbox's GitHub repositories, which contained information that allowed them to take over Dropbox for a while, or compromise Dropbox. So very, very common. And you can see that, they talk about this threat and they talk about the controls and the things you should do, like, you should train people to prevent phishing attacks and that sort of stuff. Here's another example in 2022, advanced persistent threat. So that means nation state like thing targeted the Portuguese and Brazilian embassies, and it said they had malicious files that were installed using what's called HTML smuggling, which again just allowed them to socially engineer people, open links and malicious attachments, which had malicious coding and content in them that allowed them to take over the Portuguese and Brazilian embassies here. And again, you can see that they said social engineering utilizing compromised email addresses. So they'd compromise people's email accounts using social engineering, and then got those email accounts and used them to further social engineer other people. They fabricated embassy administrative updates and with malicious attachments sent to embassy employees. So, it's social engineering, very, very common, still a big deal. And let me see, this feeds into the next issue, which is logon authentication issues. Attackers are many times able to socially engineer people out of their login credentials, whether they're passwords or phishable multi-factor authentication, or sometimes they're able to guess at the credentials, or maybe they break into one website and they learn a particular person's login credentials, and that person, the average person has like 170 websites that they usually share about 5 different passwords on. And well, those websites will get compromised, and the attacker will go, okay, it was this little website. Maybe they belong to like a pet website or something, and they find out Roger's password is frog, frog. Let's go see if Roger's cloud password is frog, frog, and they'll give that a try. And many times that is successful. So common methods used to steal authentication credentials. Phishing, social engineering, number one. I think half of all phishing and social engineering is designed specifically just to get login credentials of some sort. They can also try to guess at your passwords, but that only works if you have really weak passwords and the site that they're logging onto has really poor password guessing detection and prevention. Hard-coded credentials is really common, where developers will accidentally leave hard-coded credentials in software code that they post to GitHub. Ex-employees oftentimes will leave a company, and the company will change their network login and password or forget to remove it from the cloud product, so that's a problem. And of course, hacking multi-factor authentication, we'll talk about that. The most common way that logon credentials are stolen, whether a login name and password or whether it's just one-time password stolen from multi-factor authentication, is through a phishing email. And it kind of goes like this. It's called network session hijacking, but the attacker creates a phishing email that looks like it's coming from the legitimate source, whether it's Facebook or Twitter, or Instagram, or your company or whatever. The potential victim gets this email that looks as if it's coming from the legitimate source, but really it just has a phishing link, a rogue URL that they try to induce the potential victim in clicking on. If the victim doesn't hover over the URL link and notice that it's rogue and different, they may click on it. When they do that, they'll be taken to a man-in-the-middle rogue transparent proxy website, which can now copy anything that they type in, and they usually connect to the victim's real intended website. So the screen looks like the victim's real intended website, because it is, but it's really now going between this man-in-the-middle rogue proxy. And again, if they looked at the URL, they would see that the URL that they're connected to isn't the normal website URL, but everything they type in to the real website, the man-in-the-middle proxy can capture everything the website sends back to the victim, such as, credit card numbers or, personal information the website may store. The man-in-the-middle web proxy is going to get. The hacker is usually monitoring that man-in-the-middle rogue transparent proxy website. A big thing they do is try to steal the access control token and reuse it. Every time a user successfully logs into a website or service, their browser is sent a access control token cookie, which is just a text file. It's a cookie text file that's sent to the browser. It typically has a user's unique session ID in it that was randomly generated, but basically it's like the keys to the kingdom. Whoever can get that cookie can pretend to be that victim. So the hacker captures the access control token cookie going from the website to the victim, and then they disconnect the victim, install the access control token cookie in their own browser, the bad guy does, and then logs in as the victim. And if you've never seen this before, I'm going to show you a video that Kevin Mitnick, our rest in peace, Kevin Mitnick, he was our chief hacking officer for a lot of years until he passed away in July of 2023. But he created some really great demos, and I show one of his demos that demonstrates this. I think I'm talking in this case, but it's really Kevin behind the scenes there. But if you want to see more about this video, I do a shortened version of it. If you want to see a longer version of it, you can go to this link at the bottom of your screen. But let me go ahead and play Kevin's demo right now.
So here we are on an inbox, a regular looking inbox, and one of those emails has a phishing email. Kevin's going to click on it. It looks like just a normal email from somebody saying, hey, let's connect on LinkedIn. But this is a phishing email. And if the victim was looking at the URL, they'd see that it's LLinkdin.com, not LinkedIn.com. But a lot of people would miss that, think it was from LinkedIn, and then click on the button. when they clicked on the button, if they didn't realize it was taking them to the wrong place, if you look up in the top hand side there, it's LL LinkedIn, not LinkedIn. But really what this is the man in the middle website that's capturing when the victim types in their login name and password. And even LinkedIn is going to prompt the victim to input their MFA credentials after they put in their login name and password. But really what the victim is connected to is a man in the middle website that is capturing all that information, the login name, the password, and the multi-factor authentication code that they type on in here. So, the person gets sent the code, they type it in, they think they're putting it to the real website, but really it's a fake website that's capturing it. If you look behind the scenes there, the hacker using their hacking tool behind the scenes has captured the login name and password. The victim is actually in on the real website right now. It has passed them through to the real website. But this is what the hacker captured. You can see email address, password, and what's called the access control token cookie. They could have, if they wanted to, captured that 4 or 6 digit code that they typed on in, but they really, in this particular case, don't even need it because they have the website's cookie. Every time someone logs in successfully, whether it includes MFA or not, the website will send back a cookie that basically says, hey, you've been approved, you authenticated. The hacker can capture that and then paste it into their browser. So here is an example. Kevin is going into his browser, going to the LinkedIn real website. He's not even going to try to log in as the user with their login name and password. He's simply going to inject the stolen cookie into his browser session. He's doing it right here. He's going to open up the admin console, the developer console, copy that stolen cookie into his browser, and simply refresh his browser, and he will be logged in as the victim. And there is the attacker on the real website and as the victim. And this sort of attack would work against probably 95% of multi-factor authentication today.
So very, very common. These man in the middle attacks, super common, been used to steal millions of credentials and still, hundreds of thousands of cloud credentials. It is the most common way that credentials are stolen today and works with or without passwords and multi-factor authentication in most cases. Here's a news article. This is from 2022, but it was Microsoft warning people about what they call, we used to call them man-in-the-middle attacks. Now Microsoft uses adversary in the middle. I guess it's more gender neutral. And I'm actually picking it up. Adversary in the middle, sounds better. Why blame the men for everything? But they're saying here that this is an attack, adversary in the middle phishing campaign attempted to target more than 10,000 different organizations. And it worked and skipped the authentication process, even if the user had enabled multi-factor authentication. Here, the Uber breach, how did Uber, and Uber's been breached a couple of times, but in 2022, the first Uber data breach began with a hacker purchasing stolen credentials. How do those credentials get stolen? Probably social engineering of some sort, but they purchased these credentials on a dark web market web place or dark web marketplace. And then they attempted to connect to the Uber network using those credentials, but it failed because the Uber employee the account was protected by multi-factor authentication. So the hacker then contacted the Uber employee who had the credentials of over WhatsApp. They pretended to be a part of Uber IT security. So the real employee was getting this, hey, you need to approve this login or provide this number or say, okay, it's all right to log in. That employee wasn't doing it. So they social engineered the employee into believing they were Uber IT support and needed the employee to approve the login connection to get on. And once they got, the Uber employee approved it for what they thought was the IT security team. And then the bad guys got on the network and compromised Uber in a bigger way. So to remember, how did the attacker get the credentials to start with in the first place? Probably social engineering. Some other ways, again, is hard-coded passwords. It's really, really common that developers of a company accidentally or on purpose leave login credentials in their development code, and they upload them to websites like GitHub. And surveys and studies have shown that from the time that a developer accidentally leaves login credentials and a code that they upload to GitHub, which for some reason allows public to view the code by default, is about 30 minutes from the time. So the developer uploads this development code that they left the login credentials in to help make developing applications easier to troubleshoot. And it takes about 30 minutes for attackers to learn that data and then start attacking the company using it. Pretty wild stuff. Hard-coded passwords, again, it happens a lot. That real software that we all use, especially on devices and things like routers and hubs and switches and stuff, is hard-coded in, and then the attacker learns that and can use that to log in to that environment. Here was an example of a contractor for Universal Music Group that exposed some internal FTP credentials. And then they were able to also access some AWS Amazon Web Services configuration details, including the secret access key and password. So basically, and also SQL passwords and just craziness. But it's not unusual that developers and contractors accidentally leave that in people's code. So what are the defenses? Education, so people don't do those things, and certainly education to stop social engineering and phishing. You should require phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication wherever you can to protect valuable data and systems. Most MFA, the way that the most popular stuff that people use, Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator, Duo, and stuff like that, is very easily phishable, and it's as easily phishable and bypassable as the passwords they are intended to replace. I actually have a list in there. That second LinkedIn link there, my list of good, strong MFA list, phishing-resistant MFA. There's a lot of good stuff out there like FIDO2 and even smart cards of olden days. They're phishing resistant, and you should be using phishing resistant MFA to protect valuable data and systems wherever you can. If you do need to use passwords, you should probably be using a password manager. You want to create a strong, complex, unique password for every site and service that you use. And you should change it at least once a year because sometimes those websites get compromised. You don't know about it. And again, we're very big believers in using password managers to allow you to do that, or long password phrases. Rather, you use a password manager. Sites that have logins should have account lockout enabled. Many of them don't, and we'll talk about it. Many of them will have it account lockout enabled, meaning if you guess too many times, it locks it up on a central login page, where forget to do that on an API or some other lesser used site. Let's see, you may want to lock logins to predefined addresses, or even better, digital certificates. So have digital certificates required to allow someone to log in. Certainly like Microsoft Remote Desktop Protocol has that ability. SSH has that ability where you can say only people that have a trusted certificate from this organization or have this digital signature are allowed to log in to cloud products. You should do that. And you should prevent and scan for hard-coded credentials in all code. So educate your developers about never hard-coding credentials in their code, never uploading it to public websites like GitHub where everybody can see their code. And on top of that, you should scan for hard-coded credentials in code repositories. So it should be, proactive about that. So again, what I recommend for login authentication is use phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication wherever you can. If you can't, try to use multi-factor authentication of any type. If you have to use passwords, use a password manager. If you must create a password, it should be a passphrase that is 20 characters or longer, which nobody wants to use, which is why you should use a password manager. Password managers create strong, super random passwords that are unique for every website, and actually make using the web and inputting login names and passwords even easier than usual. Another big problem on the cloud, this has been a problem on-premises networks forever. And when I was a penetration tester for many years, for 20 years, I would always look for overly permissive permissions, meaning that everyone full control or everyone can read. That'd be one of my most common ways to break into places, was to find locations, folders that had overly permissive permissions, websites with overly permissive permissions, databases with overly permissive permissions. And especially if they were common, like I'd have network login directories and stuff back in the days of NetWare that would have everyone full control. And I could put malware and put, eavesdropping software in there and then run it on everybody's machine. But in the cloud, it's an even bigger issue, and probably because for a long time, most cloud products, when you put up a new folder or data bucket, as we call it, the default permission was everyone can read or everyone full control, and they told the user or the admin you need to lock that down. Well, most people take the defaults, and so there was a lot of overly permissive permissions out there, usually due to human error. Uh, been a long common error on on-premises networks, but it's even more so in the cloud products because cloud products are accessible over the internet. Here's an example story from February 2023, where there was an email server that was for the U.S. Department of Defense. They had 3 terabytes of internal military emails, many pertaining to U.S. Special Operations Command, but they misconfigured the server without a password, allowing anyone on the internet that could access the server to download anybody's email just by knowing its IP address. And again, as bad as this is, it's, this probably occurs 10,000 times a day that somebody is putting something with overly permissive permissions out there on a cloud product, out there on the internet. This is a really common example where people will have Amazon Web Services S3 storage buckets. So basically equivalent to a folder, but on Amazon Cloud Services. And they were configured for public access, downloadable by anyone who entered the web buckets IP addresses or domain names into their internet browser. This has happened. If you have data up on the cloud, this is the sort of thing you should check for and try to prevent. You should routinely, once a quarter, at least once every half year, go look at all the data that's stored up there in the cloud and make sure the permissions are set correctly, because they oftentimes aren't. This, thousands of cloud organizations have been compromised because of overly permissive, in this particular case, Amazon Web Services S3 storage buckets. Like, it's happens all the time. Here's another example of it where 120 million American households were exposed. And this is just someone found these overly permissive Amazon Web Services storage buckets. Let me say, Amazon responded by making it locked down. But I don't know if it's everyone just read or it's whatever, but Amazon at least has made it's not public. Everyone can full control. And I think it's no longer everyone can read. But still, everybody should check for overly permissive permissions anytime they can. It's a really common exploit type in the web. Here's another example, again, with Amazon AWS S3 storage buckets that happened at Honda. So they, found out that they could access this data and access passwords and stuff. Pretty wild. So what are your defenses? Again, education for people that are making cloud storage buckets to make sure that they're appropriately permissioned. Everybody should practice least privilege permissions whenever they can. You should periodically audit and verify those permissions. Again, I'd say every quarter to every half year at latest. You should have some ability to alert when there's been unauthorized permission changes on a product, that somebody gets notified when there's a permissions change and can check to make sure that was correct. You should have strong change and configuration control so people aren't willy-nilly changing permissions all the time. Again, you may want to lock logins to data buckets to particular IP addresses, or use digital certificates or other technology, like you have to be behind and using your VPN connect to the data storage buckets or something like that. There is rarely a reason why the general internet needs to connect to your data storage buckets, right? And you can also wrap, there's some digital encryption technologies that will encrypt your data, so that if someone steals that data, it's still encrypted and it wraps the data. And if they don't have the authorized decryption keys or processes or VPN, they can't read the data. That's kind of nice if you have something like that. There's a lot of products out there that wrap the data in a secure encrypted container. So it's a lot easier for an attacker to open if they steal the whole data bucket. Another big problem, unpatched software. I've been saying for years, at least 10 years, that unpatched software has been involved in 20 to 40% of successful attacks, often along with social engineering, getting people to download this exploit that then takes advantage of this unpatched software or firmware. Firmware has become a bigger deal lately. But Mandiant recently said that unpatched software and firmware was involved in 33% of attacks. So that falls right in the range of my 20 to 40% there. So a third third of successful attacks involve unpatched software and firmware. So that's a pretty big deal. So what do the hackers do? How do they find it? They typically try to find unpatched software or firmware. There's dozens to hundreds of hacker tools that do that. Nmap, a network mapper, is the most popular one. Shodan's a web service. It can literally tell you what's unpatched out there on the internet. Nick2, that was a web scanner product that I used a lot as a penetration tester. But so you find get a software service that tells you what's unpatched out there on the internet. You then have to either create or locate a related exploit. A lot of hackers go to this website called exploitdb at exploit-db.com, and then they use that exploit against that particular target. It's really common. Here's the exploitdb database. When I took this screenshot, it said they had over 42,000 different exploits on that website. I think it's up to like 50,000 and something, over 50,000 now. It's on the internet, been on the internet for years. You don't have to be hackers don't have to be a genius. I'm not a genius, and yet I broke into every site I ever wanted to break into, either using social engineering or looking for something unpatched. I never found a site, and I was hired as a penetration tester to break in hundreds of sites. I never found a site that was fully patched ever. There was always something, and a lot of times the stuff that was unpatched was their defensive products, their VPNs, their Cisco routers, and the same things on the cloud. The cloud runs on products, right? Every cloud product is running on software and firmware and can be attacked the same way. And again, like in this case here, I'm like searching, show me what might be able to break into Windows 10 or Windows 11. And, it's like, oh, there's 414 different exploits you can try to break in, against Windows 10, 11, or whatever. Usually when you look up and you get the exploit, a lot of times it's Python code these days, or it could be a lot of hackers like using Metasploit. Metasploit is a free product, but it's also a commercial product with people. The Metasploit framework allows you to pick up exploits. In this case, this is an exploitation that's trying to attack RDP. The blue keep RDP remote Windows kernel after use. So you don't have to be a genius. Somebody else wrote the code for you. You just have to download it, insert it in the tool, and then fire it off on your intended target. Here's LastPass. If LastPass was it's still probably in the top 2 most common password managers out there. It's been compromised 3 times in the last couple of years, and at least one of those times was due to unpatched software that the attackers were able to install a keylogger on a senior employee's computer. He was working out of his home. He had a vulnerable version of Plex media server software, and I think it had just been announced just a couple of days before. But in that time, the attacker was able to find that this researcher had this unpatched software, abused it, exploited it, got in, put a keylogger on that developer system, was able to use that to compromise LastPass's database, which may have led to either compromising LastPass customer passwords, or if not, they were encrypted and then possibly could be, cracked. Some of the weaker ones could be cracked or something like that. But although, here it goes. The vulnerability for this developer was patched years ago. They said roughly 75 versions ago. So you're running software and hardware, you need to make sure that it's patched. Here's another example where somebody got compromised. Public available database belonging to VoIPO was not properly secured. They had an insecure Elasticsearch database belonging, and it was found using the Shodan search engine. Again, that's a search engine you can buy. It used to be free. Now it's commercial, but it's not expensive. It's 30, 40 bucks a month, where you can say, find me all the servers on the internet that have this particular unpatched vulnerability, and then connect to them and exploit them. It really is super easy to do. Here's another one, Equifax, which is one of the largest, exploits, breaches of all time. Most of our financial records are in that. 143 million people's records got compromised, and that was because of unpatched Apache struts, which is some software that had been out for like nearly a month, and Equifax just didn't get around to patching it fast enough. And just again, here's some other links there, where people are finding unpatched software. Or Travelex, that used to be this really cool service in the airport where you could exchange currency and stuff all the time. It was actually taken down by ransomware, and the parent company sold it. because of the impacts of this COVID at the time, which cut down services, but also they said in the financial statement that the ransomware that got in because of unpatched VPN software led to so much damages that they ended up selling that company. And I can no longer transfer my currency using Travelex, which I like their service. They used to take a big chunk out of my money sometimes, but it was nice and convenient in most airports. What I recommend people is patch your software, and let me say, and firmware. Firmware is just harder to patch software, especially if it's on the CISA known exploited vulnerabilities catalog. Last year, there's over 29,000 different publicly announced exploits that had to be patched. Over 29,000. I mean, that's like 88 a day or something like that, day after day. Well, only about 2.7% of those exploits were ever used to exploit a real world target by a real world hacker. Historically, it's been 2 to 4%. Each year, only about 2 to 4% of exploits that are announced are ever used by a hacker or malware. Those exploits are now captured. The ones that are used by real world attackers and real world targets are captured by the CISA known exploited vulnerabilities catalog. If you have software or firmware in there, by the way, Microsoft software only is about a quarter of the list these days. And it's a lot of stuff that's like, I just recently saw like an Apple patch exploit from 2022. That's really common that the things that are being exploited were exploited many years ago, but it just turns out people aren't patching their stuff. So patch your stuff. Application programming interface is the last of my top 5. Application programming interface is usually this programmatic connection that it's really, in practicality, it's just a URL link. But that URL link allows another person or computer system to connect to some other entity's computer system to access data, to manipulate data, to input data. Most mid-sized to larger organizations like KnowBe4, we have a lot of APIs that people can use and access to use our products and things like that. These APIs are hideously insecure in most organizations. Like, it turns out a lot of the password guessing attacks are actually done against APIs. So the companies often put in account lockout and password guessing detection on their email login pages and network login pages, but they forget that those same logins can be accomplished against the APIs on their network. And so they don't put account lockout, they don't put good monitoring in there. I think one report I read said 85% of password guessing attacks are actually done against APIs. So you need to do an inventory of your company to see if they have any APIs. And if they have APIs, make sure that they're well monitored and well secured, like you would other login things like that. Here's some examples. The 2023 T-Mobile API attack exposed the personal information of 37 million customers. There is a 2023 Honda API attack that allowed anybody to reset anybody else's password. That's certainly not good. And there's another at the bottom there where this crypto ATM manufacturer was abused to steal $1.5 million, all because they had an insecure API. Here's another one, API security company. Firetel says that 500 million records have been exposed by APIs. I think, let's say that's in 2023. So 500 million records exposed by APIs in 2023. Said 92%, another study said 92% of surveyed organizations experienced a breach due to an API attack. Acme said 75% of password spray attacks were done using APIs. So, you always wonder when you hear password spray attacks, which is the attackers trying all kinds of different passwords against a bunch of accounts. How are they successful? How is account lockout not working? And that's because the attackers are going against the lesser secured, lesser monitored application programming interfaces. That is a huge, huge problem in most organizations, and it's an even bigger problem in cloud products today. Very common that the APIs are attacked. So what are your defenses? Again, inventory your APIs, not only on your on-premises network, but the APIs that are available on the cloud products that you use and subscribe to. You want to make sure that your APIs are secure as you would secure anything else. Again, many times not monitored, many times not well secured at all. So you want to monitor your APIs and alert on anomalous behavior, and that includes any cloud APIs. They may not be your APIs, they could be your cloud provider or vendors, but they're APIs that could have access to your cloud data, or services of cloud things that you subscribe to. So you need to not only know your APIs, but the ones of cloud products that you might use. So, what do you need to pay attention to? Pay attention to the top cloud hacks, the 11, the egregious 11. I say these 5 that I just listed are certainly very big: social engineering, unpatched software, insecure APIs, overly permissive permissions, and then authentication login attacks. Those 5 to me are more important than the other 6, but you really need to pay attention to them all, but concentrate on social engineering, unpatched software at the very beginning. So again, in summary, secure your cloud sites and services against social engineering, unpatched software and firmware. Use phishing resistant multi-factor authentication where you can to protect valuable data in systems. Get rid of overly permissive permissions and make sure you audit to make sure that stuff is not there, and then secure your APIs. And probably one that I don't even have on the screen again is make sure that you look for and audit for hard-coded credentials. That's another one that sometimes gets people compromised. Because social engineering is the biggest threat in most environments and most cloud products, we certainly think you should train your users how to spot, mitigate, and report social engineering attacks. You should do simulated phishing attacks as part of that training. And if they fail those simulated phishing attacks, they should get more training. We know that our average customer that comes to us, about a third of their employees are easily socially engineered. And after being trained in simulated phish attack, most organizations, our average organization gets that down to around 5%. And that's the average organization, including organizations that don't do everything we tell them to do. We have a lot of organizations where their phish prone rate, as we call it, is only 1 to 2%. And with that said, David, I think we have some time for questions, but if we don't get to your question today, feel free to email me at rogerg@knowbefore.com, rogerg@knowbefore.com. And of course, you can follow me on LinkedIn, Twitter, or Mastodon.
Okay, fabulous, Roger. Great job. Thank you very much. First thing I want to say is checking out your book, Fighting Phishing. We're going to give away 25 copies to our audience. So we're going to randomly select 25 folks from today's audience for Fighting Phishing. Just came out about a month ago. So, good luck with that. So yeah, let's take a couple questions. I don't know, sort of a quick one here. Do you think that protecting the cloud is more or less complicated than on-premises computing, or just different?
Yeah, I mean, maybe different. I would say it's actually less complicated, just by, the things that you can even do to protect it. There's very common things to do. Why it's harder is you don't, oftentimes, if you're subscribing to a service, you don't know what their protections are. You need to ask for a IT security audit, or, there's many certifications and things that will tell you how secure they are. But the probably the more difficult part is, like, one of the examples I said is make sure that you secure your APIs. You don't know all the time how your cloud provider secures or doesn't secure the API. So I think overall securing cloud products aren't as hard, but because you usually don't have the ability to see how they're being secured or to secure them, there's not a lack of transparency that can certainly make it harder. But I'd say from what you're even allowed to do to secure a cloud product, it's probably, if you had the ability to secure it, it's probably less hard because there's just less things that you can do and less things you have access to. Like maybe you're securing a cloud bucket, but you don't have to worry about, a million other rights and permissions that you might have to worry about on premises environment.
And this kind of goes hand in hand. So I know we've done webcasts in the past where part of the conversation is about communicating the breach to your user base. So if the breach was on behalf of the cloud provider, but you were a victim, as were your customers, do you find that you need to coordinate that with the cloud provider and how you go and tell customers? Do they tell customers? How does, any thoughts on that?
And then Dave, that's actually a great question. Let me say it probably differs by state and country and stuff like that. A lot of times you're not even told by the cloud provider for a long time. And then certainly like in the States, if you're a public company, you now have to notify customers within a week or whatever it is. Some countries you have to notify customers in 3 days or right away. In India, I think it's like right away. But that is something I would say that I would say that if you're able to get that in legal language, make sure that the cloud service provider is legally obligated to let you know that they are breached, because not every cloud service provider is legally obligated to even tell you. So that's a nice thing to add to your contract, that you're legally obligated to tell us you've been breached within a certain period of time. And then it certainly doesn't hurt. Dave, I think I haven't thought about that question before, so I think it's a great question, but coordinate who is going to announce that information and that sort of stuff. That's anything that you can like that you can try to work out ahead of time is positive and going to be to your benefit if if a cybersecurity event happens.
Okay, great. Let's take one more question, then we'll get to the giveaway. Roger, probably you get this all the time. Are you seeing the impact of AI on breaches, attacks? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, let me say that I don't think anybody has the data-driven stuff, but for sure there are anecdotal reports of AI being used, especially in social engineering, to create better social engineering attacks. It's been documented that AI is being used to have more sophisticated social engineering attacks. And some of the other attack types, it's theorized they could be better. Like I hear about these AI-driven password guessing engines, but I'm like, they actually have never released the data that AI-driven password guessing is faster than regular non-AI password guessing and cracking. But the idea is that a lot of the attacks could be better driven by AI stuff. But I haven't seen, outside of social engineering, like I haven't heard of AI being used to better break into unpatched software yet, but it could be. I mean, you think that AI could use, Shodan and be able to contact the exploit databases and automate it faster, but I almost think you don't even need AI for that. But let me say that, so AI is definitely a big threat. We don't yet know how much worse it's going to make it. I always tell people, like, social engineering is already involved in 70 to 90% of attacks, and that's with the bad attacks and the misspellings and the language barriers. Like, it's already really, really bad. So how much worse is AI going to make it? But we know for sure they are making more sophisticated attacks. But at the same time, we're using the defenders are using AI to fight those attacks. And if someone's phishing you, the two traits of any most social engineering emails is this email that arrives unexpectedly and it's asking you to do something you haven't done before for that requester. And that's going to be the same case whether it's AI generated or not. So there's still two traits that are going to be inherent in every phishing request that anytime you see an email that's unexpected and asking you to do something you've never done before, you need to research that using safe alternative methods before you perform that action. And that's with or without AI involved.
All right. Sounds great, Roger. Thank you again. Roger Grimes, data-driven defense evangelist with KnowBe4. Roger, thank you. Many, many thanks to KnowBe4. Without whom this event would not be possible. So thank you, KnowBe4. Thank you to our audience for being here today. We greatly appreciate it and all your questions and involvement. Let's put up the giveaway. Good luck with that, everyone. I'm Dave Littman at Truth in IT. Thanks again. We want to wish you all a great day ahead.